Today we're doing an in-depth analysis, really digging into excerpts from Reverend Dr. Eric Peters' work, Remembered by God, Family and Faith. It presents a very well-structured system. Yeah, the sources give us 6 really clear assertions that are about spiritual duties within the family, and honestly the most fascinating part might be the mechanics of prayer as he sees them. So our goal here is to unpack not just what Peters asserts, but how he connects it all, how he links these commands to specific scriptures. It creates quite a demanding framework for you, the listener, to think about.
Absolutely. And before we jump into the assertions, the title, Remembered by God, it's important. In theology, being remembered by God isn't just like recalling a memory. It often means divine action, intervention, based on a relationship or a covenant. Peters uses this right at the start to set up, the core idea. And the source material immediately grounds this whole thing in 3 pretty powerful examples of God acting because of relationships. You've got Genesis 19.29, where Lot is spared, essentially for Abraham's sake. Then Acts 16, 31 through 34, the Philippian jailer and his whole household getting saved. And Acts 11.14, talking about Cornelius and his family too. So these references, they establish this broader context. God's intervention often goes beyond just one person to the whole household. It sets the stage for the specific duties Peters then outlines.
That context is really key, isn't it? The relationship-based intervention. It explains why the family is the focus of this whole structure. Okay, so let's dive into assertion 1. This defines the family's role, the mandate. Peter starts strong. My family is my first mission field. That statement, it just immediately sets a priority, doesn't it? Spiritual work starts at home. He's basically saying the family is the primary arena, maybe even above external stuff, and he backs this up with Psalm 18.19. So the duty begins, it's anchored right there at home.
Right. And this is what I find really insightful about how Peter structures this. He immediately throws in a curveball, a reality check. That's assertion 2. It says, my family is not always an accurate representation of my spiritual life.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So right away, there's this tension, and it's something you, the listener, really have to grapple with. If the family is the mission field, the place you're supposed to work, that's assertion 1. But its outward appearance, its success, doesn't necessarily reflect your own inner spiritual state. That's assertion 2. See the disconnect.
Yeah, it separates your personal walk with God from the messy reality of family life sometimes.
Exactly. Your devotion is internal, but the field's response, the family's response, is external and, let's be honest, often unpredictable.
So if how my family looks isn't a reliable measure of my own spiritual health, how do I know the work isn't, pointless? How do I avoid feeling like it's all in vain? That disconnect between the responsibility and the actual representation makes you ask, okay, what active duties do I need to perform then to make sure the effort still counts somehow?
Precisely. And that question leads us perfectly into the next section, this dual duty Peters lays out, representation and benefit.
Okay, assertion 3. This tackles that active role. It says, God expects me to represent my family before him, and the anchor for this is Genesis 18.27.
Right. And we need to be careful with that word represent. Peters isn't just talking about being a good role model, although that might be part of it. He seems to be defining a specific spiritual act. Intercession. Actively standing in the gap between God and your family, speaking for them, carrying their spiritual needs.
So you become like a spiritual agent for the household.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, the spiritually recognized agent.
Okay, so if the individual is the agent, the representative,
Right.
There has to be a result tied to that job, right? A consequence. And assertion 4 defines that consequence really powerfully. It says the relationship with God, it must benefit my family.
Yeah, notice the wording there. It's quite strong. It doesn't say it might benefit or should benefit. The source insists it must. This makes the benefit a mandatory outcome. It's like non-negotiable proof that you've actually done the job of representing them. Assertion 3.
Mandatory. Wow, okay.
It's a high standard. And this idea of mandatory benefit, it's supported by 2 specific scriptures he uses together. Psalm 112, verses 1 and 2, talks about the righteous person's children being mighty, a generational blessing, a clear spiritual advantage passed down. But the other one, Job 1.5, that's where you see this idea in concrete action. It's quite striking.
Job 1.5. Can you unpack that a bit? What was Job doing?
Well, the text says Job regularly offered sacrifices for his children. Not because they'd necessarily done anything wrong publicly. He did it just in case. Just in case they had maybe sinned inwardly or cursed God in their hearts without anyone knowing. It was preemptive.
So he wasn't waiting for a problem. He was acting ahead of time, protectively.
Exactly. It's proactive spiritual labor for the family. And that really shows the scope of the expectation in Peter's source material. Making sure the benefit happens is this ongoing, protective, even anticipatory requirement. It's not just reacting when things go wrong.
Okay, so putting assertions 3 and 4 together, there's a clear cycle emerging. The individual has to take on this role of intercessor, the representative. That's the duty. And the necessary result, the proof of doing that duty, is this tangible spiritual benefit landing on the whole family. That's the required outcome.
You've got it. The benefit is the proof of successful representation, which naturally leads to the next question. How? How does the representative's spiritual work, specifically their prayers, connect that role to that mandatory benefit? And this is where we get into the mechanics of intervention, some really specific details here.
Right, the mechanics. Assertion 5 is where it gets really specific about prayer. It says, my prayers for my family are recorded by God. Recorded, like data.
Exactly like data, not just heard and then gone, but logged, permanent.
The scripture cited for this is Psalm 58.6. The idea of prayers being recorded, it suggests something more than just a one-time ask, doesn't it?
It really does. It implies continuity. Like each prayer isn't just a fleeting request, but maybe a data point, accumulating over time, building a sort of divine account for the family.
Okay, why is that important? Why is a permanent record more significant than just, say, an immediate answer?
Well, think about it. If the prayer is recorded, it potentially turns your temporary desire into something lasting. Leverage, maybe. It creates an enduring foundation for God to act on later, maybe even long after the moment you actually prayed. It suggests accountability, continuity for the divine commitment implied in the sources.
Accountability and continuity, okay.
And this recorded data, this account, then becomes the essential input for the final step, which is assertion 6. It specifies the consequence of this record. My prayers activate God's intervention.
Activate. So the record isn't just sitting there in a file cabinet somewhere. It's operational. It does something. How does Peter support that claim? Activation seems like a strong word.
It is a strong word. He supports it by linking Genesis 18.33 and Genesis 19.1 very closely. He presents them sequentially. Genesis 18, verse 33, is the end of Abraham's conversation, his intercession with God about Sodom. The request part is done.
Okay.
And then immediately following that, Genesis 19, verse 1, shows the divine intervention starting. The angels arrive to carry out the planned judgment for Sodom, salvation for Lot.
So the sequence is key. Request finished, action begins.
Peters interprets that sequence as showing the recorded intercession was the trigger, the thing that turned the potential for intervention into actual physical reality on the ground.
That's a very specific reading of those verses, connecting them like that. So if we step back and look at the whole system Peters outlines, wow, it's quite a complete picture. You've got the family as the priority zone for spiritual work. That's the role. Then the individual has to act as this spiritual representative, the duty.
Right.
This role must result in a real mandatory spiritual benefit for the family, the required outcome.
Yep, non-negotiable.
And prayer is the mechanism, treated as recorded data, the activation trigger.
Which leads to direct divine action, often for the whole household, the intervention.
It's a very demanding theological pathway he lays out, very structured. Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive then, we've looked closely at Peter's 6 assertions. We grouped them into sort of 3 big ideas. First, the definition of the family role with that built-in tension. Second, the absolute requirement for the relationship with God to benefit the family. And third, these specific mechanics of prayer being recorded and activating intervention.
Exactly. And that synthesis, it brings us right back to that core conflict, that central tension that you should really keep thinking about. Remember assertion 2. My family is not always an accurate representation of my spiritual life. We established that early on.
Right, the disconnect between internal state and external reality.
But then you have assertion 4, demanding that my relationship with God must benefit my family.
The mandatory benefit.
Right, so here's the final thought, straight from the tension within Peter's own framework. If the benefit is mandatory, the absolute proof you're doing your job. But the mission field itself, the family, doesn't always give you accurate feedback, doesn't always reflect the spiritual work you're putting in. How do you find assurance? How, according to this system, do you ensure that required non-negotiable benefit actually gets delivered to a field that, by Peter's own admission, might stay opaque or resistant or just not clearly reflective of your own spiritual health?
That tension between the required outcome and the uncertain reception.
Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it? It's inherent in this very structured approach to family faith presented in the source, something to definitely mull over.